The restaurant industry today is facing some of its biggest challenges ever, both from a social and economic aspect. We're going to dive into this deep today on the Barron Report. My name is Paul Barron, and welcome to the show. All right, so when you look at the restaurant industry, two of the biggest factors that come to mind for most people is the number of people that are employed within the restaurant industry and the impact within our local communities. With me today, I've got Chef Andrew Zimmern, who is a TV and chef personality. Maybe you recognize him from a show called What's Eating America. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, so we're reaching you in Minneapolis, kind of a hotbed for a lot of social issues. And also, when you look at the restaurant industry in itself, you've got some interest there. But let's kind of jump into the first question, and mainly kind of a look at where you guys are seeing kind of the landscape between what's happening here in the U.S. from a social standpoint, as well as the food side of it. Obviously, these two things start to intersect quite a bit. I want to kind of get your feedback on what you're seeing out there in the streets of the United States today.
When you talk about social issues, what are you referring to?
Well, just the aspect of running a restaurant with the current state as it is. So some restaurants are faced with, do we open and even allow guests in if we're at, say, a 25% capacity, all those kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the restaurant industry is hamstrung right now. I imagine there's probably states like South Dakota where you can do just about anything. Wisconsin, I think the appearances you can do just about anything, but I think they're at 75%. I have lost track as things ebb and flow, especially because right now we're coming out of a week that has actually surpassed our July highs in terms of COVID-related cases. We have hospitals that are starting to feel overwhelmed again. We're dealing with massive spikes in every single state, 49 out of 50 states. You cannot contain and mitigate and contain a viral pandemic if you are allowing people to congregate in places where other people are congregating, and restaurants are being put in the position of being arbiters of the public health. Right. We have such a lack of federal leadership in this country on this issue that we have left decisions up to the states on a national public health issue. The problem with that is that people move between the states. So, you know, it's not okay. I live in Minnesota. We have a very alert governor who is every day monitoring the situation. And while not everyone is happy with his decision making, I support his slow and steady approach, prioritizing the public health. Right next door in Wisconsin to our east, or South Dakota to our west, you have governors and state houses that are doing the exact opposite, and in fact are having super spreader events all the time, or allowing their restaurants and bars to be open to the degree that I believe it is not in the best interest of the public health. Yeah. Nationally, what you see are restaurants trying to get the most business they can under the rules, while at the same time being good custodians of the public health. You have to remember, restaurants traditionally, since the 50s, have been custodians of the public health through a health inspection system, right? So we're used to doing that. We have been custodians of the public mandate, right? So there's a drinking age. So restaurants, for the most part, card people who appear to be underage. So we're very used to these kinds of things. But the horror stories that we hear coming out of restaurants having to remind people that in public places you need a mask on is something that I have witnessed myself in some of my restaurant visits. I mean, I'm dealing with them all the time when I enter public buildings, when people come here into our office where we have a very strict C-19 policy. In terms of number of people in the building, masks, tests, temperature taking at the door, all the rest of that kind of stuff. Right. To put restaurants in the position of doing that, I think, is horrifically unfair. And at the same time, those restaurants are the lifeblood of our communities, and they are employing so many human beings. You have to remember, the number one totem pillar of unemployed in America continues to be people from the independent restaurant and hospitality sector.
For sure.
So restaurants are really between a rock and a hard place right now, and are desperate for sales because they are facing an extinction event if the Restaurants Act does not pass in the Senate.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the scenario we're looking at, is that you just laid it out eloquently there, is the social aspect of it has invaded into the aspect of food service, entertainment, the whole aspect of what hospitality is really all about. It's usually, in most cases, a very welcoming environment. It's something where family and friends get together. All of that has pretty much changed the entire landscape of how food is going forward. So you guys just finished, did you finish filming the season on What's Eating America? Or are you still in production?
We're waiting to see. We just finished shooting a new series of mine that's going to premiere on the Magnolia Network called Family Dinner. And we're waiting to get our starting orders if we're going to do a season 2 of What's Eating America.
What's Eating America. Okay, very cool. I could see that being the case when you look at being able to cover what's happening in the U.S. here today, especially from the restaurant aspect of how operators essentially are going to be moving forward in the future. We get a chance to talk to a lot of operators here on the show. Here recently, it's been just a litany of operators kind of telling the same story, but there's been a few handful that have kind of changed their model from how they were doing business to really started to redefine their business in moving forward and adjusting, whether it's been takeout, delivery, virtual and dark kitchens or ghost kitchens, those kind of things. Obviously, those are some of the biggest ones.
There are great success stories out there. I have friends who have pivoted completely. They've dropped their numbers down. They're still able to make their rent and their insurance payments, and they're actually in the black. It's just that is a teeny little sliver of the business.
Yeah. Right. Well, and the labor requirement for that kind of system doesn't really sustain what we've had. I mean, we had one time at the height of our industry, we're at 15 million people employed. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we're not there now, losing almost 5 million, I think, from last numbers we gathered. That's a huge, you're talking 30% of the industry that essentially is either out of work, on unemployment, or looking for new work because of the closures that's happened within either the independent restaurant state or even some of the brands that have started to close some of their underperforming units, which obviously takes away workforce, especially at the crew level. So when you look at this, you guys get a chance to go into a lot of different restaurants out there in the country, and you're talking to operators. Obviously, you are an operator. Where do you see this moving beyond? So let's assume 2 tracks here. One, we see a stimulus that actually gets through the government, and we see some support. Do you feel like that will be the one thing that is going to really kind of keep the restaurants in the business that are kind of on the bubble and help accelerate? It's the only thing. So there's no other way other than that.
No.
Absolutely. Okay.
Hard
there
stop.
You go.
I mean, who's you simply can't. We have 2 tracks here that are that I would offer up to you. Track number 1 is federal leadership on an issue that involves saving Main Street USA and other small businesses. That includes the Restaurants Act. We're talking about what is now in the Senate. I think it's Heroes version 2.0, right?
Right.
That passed the Congress. The Senate needs to actually do their job and pass a stimulus that is good for Americans and for Main Street USA. That Heroes Act 2.0 seems to cover all the bases. They can negotiate up or down 10%, fold in some people here, fold out some people there, but they need to pass stimulus in order for restaurants to get the relief as outlined in the Restaurants Act. If that does not happen, there will be an extinction event of restaurants, and I'm talking about 85% of restaurants will close. There are a tremendous number of restaurants that are not in any polls, not in any numbers, that are very much like one of my restaurants, where we simply on March 1st shut the door, did the calculus that we could pay rent and our utilities for a certain number of months, and hope for a stimulus package that would come in that would make sense for us. So that's what we're doing with one of our restaurants. And it really is, we're not in anyone's poll. We're not in anyone's data, because we have simply shut our doors with a, hopefully we will be open soon sign.
Right.
There are some restaurants that have officially gone out of business. In other words, they've surrendered their lease or sold their building or done the work that is necessary to officially close. What we have to remember here is that restaurants have, depending on how you define them, between 11 million and 15 million people employed in the United States. When you include hospitality, farms, the front side and back side of the supply chain, you start talking about 50 million human beings are involved in that. It is a massive piece of GDP. Independent restaurants alone are almost 5% of GDP. And independent restaurants are the homes for employees in some very special populations. We're, I believe, number one employer of single moms and single dads, right? Yep. So because of the hours and the flexibility. I believe we're the number two employer on new immigrants. Depends how you define that. It's us and farming, but that's part of our supply chain, right? That's being affected by C-19 and restaurant closures. We are the number one or number two employer of, depends whose data you look at, of returning citizens. We are the number one employer of first-time job seekers. In other words, kids get out of college or out of high school and need to get a job. Yeah. You can go and get training in a restaurant and actually start working, right? So those people are not going to find all of a sudden that they can go get a job at whatever other business is open if the restaurant goes out of business. We are looking at people for whom returning to work is a bigger challenge than other citizens. So we have very, very special populations that we need to protect. It's also part of the social fabric of our country in terms, this is where human beings gather, where we celebrate. It is the heartbeat of whatever tourism we still have in this country. If I go to San Francisco, I don't want to grab a strawberry spinach salad at some chain restaurant, right? I want to eat the foods that make San Francisco wonderful. And that is a very, very painful realization that I think people have not come to in sufficient numbers to get out in front of their representatives and get them to support this relief package. I would encourage people to go to the Independent Restaurant Coalition's website, saverestaurants.com. We have a widget there that you can send a note to your senators and make sure that they are being aggressive about passing this thing. Regardless of who wins the election on November 3rd, whether it's a continuation of the current administration or a lame duck session in the Senate, lots of stuff gets done in the lame duck session. We need to provide relief for Americans. That's what this is about. And the independent restaurants represent a huge section of that economy.
Yeah, and I don't know that a lot of lawmakers are really completely aware of the impact and what you've just explained is the trickle-down effect on our entire society.
They are. There's just many of them that are ignoring it out of political expediency.
That just don't care.
They just simply don't care. We just saw, I believe it was Friday or Saturday, the Senate Majority Leader saying, well, we're going to, the next administration will come in here and undo everything we've done, and we've done our job with the federal judges and the Supreme Court, and seemingly throwing up his hands. You heard the White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, on Sunday morning on Jake Tapper's State of the Union say we are not going to go after COVID-19, a very passive policy. That is not what leadership is all about. There are lots of things that we can leave up to the states, but the states do not have the money. They've already burned all their money getting PPE to people, funding hospitals, taking care of special populations in jails and stuff. I mean, the state budgets have absolutely been devastated by this pandemic to the point that they don't know about policemen, teachers, firemen headed into 2021. We have an abdication of responsibility when the federal government does not support policy surrounding public health issues. That is the number one role of federal government, is the wellness of its citizens. And if this pandemic doesn't qualify as something to deal with immediately, I don't know what does.
Yeah, for sure. Andrew, let's look at another track here. Let's assume that we get government approval, the stimulus does come through, we start to see some of the corrections here in the country, at least from a financial standpoint. The other aspect is the consumer confidence, being able to get guests to return to restaurants, obviously get back in the groove of being able to run our businesses at 90% to 100% capacity. When you look at that, because that is a bigger concern, obviously with what should be a vaccine very close, we'll see how that comes together. We can still be 6 months.
Vaccine is not very close.
All right, so we're still 6 months away, maybe at most.
Well, you've hit the nail on the head. So before we get too far afield, let's address this issue of consumer confidence and consumer demand. Consumer confidence has to return before there is consumer demand for a product.
Bingo.
Right?
Yep.
And so there are several things that need to happen in order for people to begin to return to public places, whether it's movie theaters, sporting events, restaurants, anywhere that human beings congregate.
Yep.
The first thing is that we have to have mitigation and containment of the virus. We still, if you go back to what the CDC and NIH guidelines were in March and April, they were talking about numbers, 2-week levels, 14-day periods of numbers decreasing, right? That's the very first step. They were talking about testing and tracing. None of those things have happened. We essentially, since we have just busted through in most states record numbers with COVID, are in worse shape than we were in March, April, May, June, July. Right? Because July 16th, I think, was the high water mark nationally. And I think we just broke that record over the weekend. So we have not mitigated or contained. So we're in the exact same place that we were back in February and March. So let's assume that we have, right now, the current administration has said they are not going to mitigate or contain. They're just letting this thing go. They have no plan for testing. They have no plan for tracing. They have no plan for mitigation and containment. So what we have to hope is that there's an administration change, that we get mitigation and containment at the same time that this argument is going forward, because we live in a capitalist society. Thank you, capitalism. There are people out there, drug companies, both ones here in America and abroad, who are working very hard on this because it is an opportunity to make money. Right? If you have a vaccine, you come up with a vaccine or really good therapeutics and can get them through the right amount of testing, you can get people around the world to take this vaccine or take these therapeutics if they get COVID, and consumer confidence and demand will begin to increase. We know from epidemiologists that once a vaccine comes out that works, we then have to have trials with large populations of people. And the vaccine, we've already done polling on this around the country, the vaccine has to start to enter numbers, not where, the polio and measles vaccines are, right? Because those are like 99%, right? But we got to get above 85, 90%. Right now, experts are saying that if we wash hands, don't congregate, and wear masks, we're at 80%. We can't even get 50% of Americans to do that. So my big question for people is, at what point does that vaccine and those therapeutics increase, number one, solve the problem, and number two, what percentage of Americans will actually take it? So what I've been talking,
which is going to be a problem.
Well, yes, and the epidemiologists and the experts that I talk to, my little pet theory is, once we get a vaccine and therapeutics, and we're anywhere from 6 to 9 months away from the public having access to them, right? because we could have a vaccine pop up in 3 months, but then it has to be tested and go through trials. And then they have to make it in sufficient numbers for billions of people around the world to get this thing, right? So, and who's going to get it? Is it going to be pricey? Is COVID, if this current administration stays in power and the ACA is rolled back or eliminated, would COVID be a pre-existing condition? Current administration is suing to have pre-existing conditions taken out of the ACA, like right now, today. I mean, this is that's something that's going in front of the Supreme Court very soon. So the problem really becomes find a vaccine, get it tested, so 6-9 months from now, and then add 6 months, 9 months onto that before consumer confidence and demand returns. So that is why this Restaurants Act is something that extends us 12 to 18 months and it allows a tax credit for employees so that restaurants can hire people back and let the restaurants manage the economics of their restaurant with this relief package in play so that 30, 40% of business, they can keep their doors open, keep more people employed, and keep the supply chain moving because they're a big piece of that supply chain. Because I think it's going to be a while before consumer confidence is ready. I wouldn't go and eat in a restaurant in a state that's having huge flare-ups right now. And I would not go into one where those restaurateurs are forced to empty their pockets to try to take care of their customers first before their employees. We have an obligation as business owners to keep our employees safe first. If we don't have the ability to do that, how can we keep our guests safe?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think you're dead on. Mike, when you just kind of laid that out, you're right. I think now we're talking really another year, which is full of all of 2021 to deal with this. So now I understand where you're coming from when you say an extinction event, because we are nearing that right now where there's a lot of restaurants who have pretty much run out of their EIDL money. They've already, obviously PPP is long gone. We're seeing now the numbers truly start to come in terms of closures, restaurants that are just hanging up, or guys like yourself who are kind of going dark and not just kind of holding on, but not holding on type
Look,
kind of thing.
It's winter time here. Look at a state like North Carolina or any of the states sort of along that middle of the country, right? The cold weather, it gets cold in Tennessee, right? It's warm enough right now to be able to eat outdoors. And at night with the heaters and all the rest of that, can't do it in Minnesota. But winter is coming, literally. No Game of Thrones joke. So as those cold weather those states along the middle start to experience cold weather, numbers are going to decrease. It is so important that we pass the Restaurants Act because that gives us the relief package long enough and sustained enough. By the way, prioritizing restaurants owned by people of color, women, et cetera, so that the right people get the first bite at the apple, the folks who need it the most. Right. And then we will start to see at least some guarantees of recovery. I mean, you have to remember, restaurants pay so much in taxes. Municipalities all across America are missing a vital piece of their tax base.
Huge.
With all these businesses closed, they need help, as I said, just funding police, fire, and teachers. It is a disaster.
Yeah, this is definitely one that I think is going to go down in the history of our entire society as an event, much like when you look at the Roman Empire. Literally, this kind of social and economic change that hit such a large population when you look at Europe and obviously what's happening here in North America. All right, so final topic. Okay, so we get past a stimulus, consumer confidence comes back. Let's talk quickly about where you see the restaurant and hospitality segments moving into the future, because we are going to see permanent change happen in the way that we run and operate our restaurants. Where do you think that's going to fall in the future? Do you think we're going to see a lot more tech and still people going to curbside delivery and takeout and delivery?
I think takeout and delivery will always be, at least for the foreseeable future, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 years, a very, very, very larger piece of what a restaurant, maybe forever, there'll be more delivery. I think once consumer confidence returns, everybody loves, it's not just about the food, right? The food comes to you in a bag.
No, it's the
But
gathering, you bet.
it's being in a room with people. It's how I feel in that room. It's how I'm treated. It's the buzz and the hum. Restaurants are magical places. I also think restaurant owners and restaurant and food employees, people in the food space, are the most brilliant, creative, stick-to-itive, generous, kind, smart people that I know. And I think they're going to figure out ways to pivot that we haven't even thought of yet. And I think for all the restaurants that are going to automate a little more, I think you're going to have more and more restaurants and more creativity in what defines a restaurant. You know, restaurants to many people have always been defined by a financial transaction. That's a very important piece of this. But I think restaurants are defined by an emotional transaction that takes place. And I think that a lot of people are going to figure out new and different ways to emotionally connect to consumers and then make a financial transaction that makes them feel like they've gotten something of incredible value. If anyone can figure it out, it's food people. I think we're going to see all kinds of different mechanisms of change in our system. Are we going to have fewer, quote unquote, tablecloth restaurants with reservations that are just open at lunch and dinner 5 and 7 days a week, respectively? Absolutely. I think people are going to figure out ways to ring the cash register all day long. I think we're going to have a new wave of egalitarian and democratic, small d, philosophies that are going to invade our restaurant system. We also had a very brittle and fragile restaurant economy and a brittle and fragile restaurant social culture, right? That was really messed up. I mean, there was the equity within a restaurant, safety within a restaurant, emotional security, job security. You know, it was not good pre-COVID. I wish we were able to build our restaurants back brick by brick on our own, take it apart and put it back together better. Instead, we had our house blow down by the big bad wolf. I think as we build these things back, we are going to build them back better. And I can't wait to see what this incredible food community does in the years to come. I'm still very bullish on food people.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned something there that kind of struck a nerve with me in saying that takeout and delivery could dominate a lot of what restaurants do over the next decade. With that being the case, companies like Uber, Postmates, some of the most recent news with Postmates getting into the restaurant space, do you think that's going to shift kind of the dynamic for third-party delivery in the future?
We'll see. I mean, right now, third-party delivery doesn't work for restaurants, doesn't work for the makers, right? They're giving away huge dollars there. Way too much of the price. I think hub pickups, other forms of delivery, co-op restaurants where many people own the restaurant, the employees own the restaurant, but also co-op restaurant grouping where your restaurant and my restaurant share buying power. We share our own delivery systems, right? We share a lot of the costs that I can't bear on my own and you can't bear on your own, but with our two restaurants together and maybe, you know, Marie's restaurant over there and Sally's restaurant over there, the four of us get together and we can save money when we buy chickens and we can have a car that delivers food from our four restaurants. So I think that we're going to see a tremendous spike in creativity because food people are genius. I believe the golden age of restaurants is ahead of us, not behind us.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we are going to see a new shift, and maybe it's the time, you know, I talk about this a lot, is that we were kind of forced into the future. What we've accelerated in the last 6 to 8 months is probably a decade worth of change that's now happening in the restaurant industry. So I can only imagine what's going to be beyond. Once we get past COVID and we start to see society start to correct itself, especially around food and hospitality. Andrew, it's been great having you on. I feel like we could talk all day on this subject, but thank you so much for stopping in on the show today.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity and thanks for all you do.
We'll see you soon.
Take care.
So you guys listen in. All right. When you guys are listening in, maybe you're over on Spotify or on iTunes, and maybe you're on now Amazon Music, where you're listening to the audio version here of the Barron Report. Make sure and drop us a rating. That's how we kind of get feedback from our audience. And then also, if you have a great idea of someone you'd like to see here on the show, just shoot us an email to producer@foodabletv.com. And lastly, you can hit me on Twitter @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on the Barron Report.